This episode may contain stories of domestic violence. Please be advised. Welcome to the Sage Advice Podcast, where each week we sit down with people just like you who have left abusive relationships and found healing. Don't forget to check out our website, sage.community, because together we can survive abuse with grace and empathy. Now sit back and get comfortable. The Sage Advice Podcast starts right now. Hey everyone, welcome to this week's episode of the Sage Advice Podcast. So, pre-warning, this week we are tackling a very difficult subject around intimate partner violence, specifically when it comes to women that are pregnant. Now, before you shut off the episode, I know it's a heavy episode and it's an uncomfortable conversation that people don't like to have, but we need to talk about it. We need to be educated about it. We need to know what the warning signs are and the effect that it has on so many women, as you will find out in the episode. So it's informative, educational, and like I mentioned, we just want to try to prevent this behavior from happening and educating people on the warning signs. So I encourage you to keep listening. I know it can be a triggering topic, but if we can make even one person wake up and recognize the situation and try to do something about it, if we can reach one person, it'll be my goal for this episode today. So today, my guest is Lola Bragnano. She is a licensed clinical social worker, and she contacted me because she focuses on maternal care with her clients and is very passionate about this particular topic. So I hope you'll enjoy this episode. Keep listening. It's a fantastic show, and we'll see you on the other side. Thanks, guys. Hey, everybody. Welcome to this week's episode of the Sage Advice Podcast. We have with us today a very special guest who actually reached out to me to discuss a very important topic, which is intimate partner violence, or IPV, as we're going to talk about it through the episode, but specifically for women who are pregnant. So it's a pretty heavy topic, but we're going to try to make the most of it and not scare you too much because we want you to listen because it's a very important topic. So without further ado, let's introduce Lola Bragnano. How are you today, Lola? Thank you for coming.
I am great, Erin. Thank you so much for having me on. It's an honor.
Oh, well, I'm so glad you reached out. Like I mentioned, you just emailed me, and that is fantastic that Sage is reaching so many people. So tell us a little bit about yourself and how you got started in counseling, and because you're a licensed clinical social worker, right?
Yes, I am a licensed clinical social worker, and I am also certified in perinatal mood and anxiety disorders. I am also a birth trauma level 2 practitioner. And I am also an EMDR trained clinician. And what that means for people who don't know is that it's a very evidence-based, peer-reviewed trauma model that's very successful in helping people heal with trauma of all kinds. And so, I kind of came into counseling through just, ways that we all kind of come into, I guess, kind of what we do, personal experience, our own friends and family, and our own personal passions and goals and desires. I wanted to make a difference. And I have always worked with women in some way. And I actually got started with intimate partner violence. However, that was a long time ago, and that was way before we knew there was a lot of correlations between that and many other things. And one of those things we're going to talk about today.
Yeah, I'm so thankful we live in this time period where all this information is coming out, and the internet, for all the bad, it has brought a lot of good, which is connecting people and connecting resources and information. And this is a topic that I hadn't really thought about, to be honest, because I don't have children, but it's it's on the surface level a terrifying thought to be pregnant and have to deal with intimate partner violence. I'm gonna get that wrong the whole time. We'll just go with IPV. But so you sent me over some statistics on this issue. So for somebody thinking, oh, that might not happen a lot, what are we looking at as far as statistics or how often this is occurring? And actually, wait, why don't we, before we get into that, let's define what we're talking about as far as interpersonal violence during pregnancy. What does that mean?
Okay. Thank you. Let's define that. Interpersonal violence is kind of the term we use now because, as we know, right, like the nuclear family doesn't necessarily exist anymore. And it's not just married people. Some people can't get married. Some are between teenagers. And so if, however the term is used in the community, domestic violence, family violence, it's interchangeable. So if we use the different terms, it's the same thing. Interpersonal violence, domestic violence, family violence. It's okay if we use that interchangeably.
Okay.
So IPV is the catch-all just so that everybody fits in. Okay.
Right. We're not leaving anybody out. It's a serious topic.
Absolutely. Okay. Absolutely. Okay. And it's actually a public health crisis in the sense that it affects globally 2% to 13.5%. So if we think about this, there's over 7 billion people on the planet. So even if you're going on the low end, and this is self-reported, so we know the numbers are higher. So right. Even if we're going on the low end of self-reporting 2%, I mean, I'm not a mathematician. I have no idea, but that's a lot.
That's a lot of people.
That's a lot of people.
Breaks my heart. Just
awful.
And not even doing the math on it, but thinking about it.
It's that heavy. It's that heavy, and it's global. Okay. So it's not just, in the United States, it's global. And women who are pregnant or are more at risk of violence, unfortunately. It is shown that they are, it moves over into other areas, multi-dimensions of a woman's life. Medical, she is twice as likely to miss prenatal visits for a multiple of reasons. She might not be allowed to go. She's in a controlling, abusive relationship. There might be violence already occurring. A lot of times that happens. Some people don't understand that dynamic, that the abusive partner might actually become jealous of the baby. Of the baby, the attention that's going to the baby. And what are you telling the doctor if you're leaving? What if they see a mark?
Sees anything? Yeah.
What if the doctor sees anything? Okay. Because they know where to leave marks that you can't see on face or obvious skin, right? So if we have to remove to have an exam, okay. What if they're not allowed to have a transportation to get there? There's so many factors of why, and let alone the emotional, psychological shame. I might not want to explain something to someone who doesn't know me, right?
I mean, the shame and the confusion that we feel in any type of abusive relationship, verbal, emotional. I can't imagine being that scared and confused and also pregnant and maybe not being able to go or feel like I can go to the doctor.
Right.
To take care of the baby.
Yes.
Oh,
right.
I'm glad we're talking about this. I really am, because it's hope it reaches somebody out there who can listen to it and hopefully, do something.
Yes, absolutely. If we can reach one person to hopefully maybe validate what they've been through, help someone understand what they're going through, give them hope for what may come, right? That's what you have been doing with your work. And so hopefully today we can reach that goal as well. I do want to say, right, that the important part of what happens when a woman misses prenatal is that it does, do a multiple of other things, in the sense that It ends up with zero detection of missing two things: the possibility of, violence happening, and that there could be some other kind of what we call perinatal mood or anxiety going on, because women who are pregnant and in interpersonal violent relationships have higher chances of that occurring, and we'll get to that. But I do want to say quickly about the medical side is that when the research show absolutely that there is a direct association between insufficient prenatal care and adverse birth effects, such as low birth weight, preterm delivery, and that's just the medical stuff. And so also the medical stuff, if there's been violence directly to the fetus during pregnancy, it can trigger miscarriage.
Yeah.
Which is a whole nother thing. It can cause birth defects. It can cause many other things for the woman.
Yeah.
Themselves.
Yeah, I'm interested to get to that. I know we're touch on a little bit here. The first thing that brought to mind is a lot of people might not think that this particular type of abuse can happen to anybody. I think more than just verbal abuse, it's like, oh, that's a different socioeconomic class, that's a different country. How do we report that? Because it is self-reported. So how do we get these numbers? And is there a wide spectrum of the types of people that this happens to?
The wide spectrum means that it's non-discriminatory. It happens to everyone. We have women who work in domestic violence shelters who are in abusive relationships.
Yeah.
Just as we have doctors who smoke, so it's pervasive, and it's on the newer end, of discussion. And so it's good that we're doing this in that way, because a lot of people would probably never, like you said, think about it, consider it, understand it. And that comes with everything that we know about the shame and the silence that goes with violence in the relationship to begin with,
right?
The isolation and the shame to begin with. So, if we're missing appointments, if we're not talking to our friends, that the violence is there to begin with, and we're so isolated, they might not be picking up on that, while, the undetected intersectionality of the two is occurring. She is more likely to have depression start in her pregnancy, and most definitely postpartum, for sure. And what we find is that when they're missing the prenatal and someone's possibly missing that part, the left untreated mental health side is devastating postpartum. Okay. Right. It becomes that huge postpartum mood and anxiety that we hear about, postpartum depression. And we'll talk a little bit later about the most devastating intersectionality of all is that women are in more increased chances when there's domestic violence, interpersonal violence in the relationship, when there's suicide involved. Over 50% of them have an association when there's violence involved in the relationship. Over 50%. I want people to hear that, right?
That's a big... It's almost a mind-blowing number, 50%.
Yeah.
A lot of my friends and I have talked about their postpartum depression and postpartum anxiety, and it's happened to almost every female that I know who's had a baby. And I was diagnosed with PMDD, which is premenstrual dysphoric disorder or depression. And it's very hormonal, and it's very changeable, and it's a serious thing.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's a very serious thing.
And the difference between baby blues and postpartum depression, okay, is, over 80% of women have baby blues, and it's and how we differentiate between the difference between the two. And it's important to know that in the context of what we're talking about today is that it's the baby blues is very much hormonal based, and it's within 2 to 3 weeks, it is pretty much over. Okay. And we know the difference when it has to do with the length of the time that we're experiencing the symptoms and the severity. Okay. And then it falls into the perinatal, the umbrella: postpartum depression, postpartum anxiety, postpartum OCD, postpartum stress disorder, if we've had birth trauma. What we found is that 1 in 7 women have a postpartum mood or anxiety. 1 in 5, 1 in 5 have a postpartum or mood or anxiety, and 1 in 7 is postpartum depression. I apologize. And what we found is that women who are also in physically abusive relationships are 2.5 times more likely to have one of them.
I can only imagine. I mean, my random periods of depression that, hormonal based got significantly worse.
Yes.
After the stress of leaving an abusive relationship. And it's caused the rebound and the lasting effects to go on for a long time. So to add the baby to that, it almost makes sense that about the 50%, honestly, because that is some serious stuff you're dealing with. And the only thing that I try to tell myself when it comes to the hormones is, like, these are not your normal thoughts. These are not normal. This is all hormonal based. And like, that's the only savior that I think these women can have, is to remind themselves it's hormonal, but that's the baby Band-Aid on a bigger problem.
Yeah.
Wow. Hey guys, it's Erin. I'm interrupting this episode real quick just to let you know to check out the website sage.community. We've got some great new meditation classes up and a lot more to come. We'll talk to you soon. And now back to the episode.
Yeah, it's really heavy, and with domestic violence, interpersonal violence, it's very isolating. And so it makes sense, right, that the rates of the mental health is going to increase drastically when they're falling through the cracks from prenatal to postpartum. They're definitely not following up on that either, because there can be so much that's occurring. Okay. They have found that the violence can increase after, because down to you're breastfeeding and you're not looking at me. We know it takes anything to set off an entitled abuser. And so it can be so many factors at play. And if she's also had a traumatic birth, okay, what if she's terrified to come home with this baby? There's so many things that can happen. She can have a traumatic birth on top of everything else. And if she's not allowed to go for care, if she doesn't understand what's happened, if she has postpartum depression or anything already going on, it's going to be so hard to figure out what to do, where to go, right? Who is she supposed to call? She's not talking to anybody, and no one believes her anyway.
Exactly. I mean, the first thing that came to my mind is, okay, what if somebody would try to leave in the hospital, but then what if they're standing there the entire time staring at you or threatening you or giving you a glance, So social workers in hospitals, I'm sure, are trained to pick up on this, and I'm sure that they do, but these are people with free will. And
yes.
You can only do so much. There's limitations on what the legal system can do, which anybody who's had to go through the legal system in this type of situation, or any, protective orders, whatever, there's a lot of limitations.
Yes, unfortunately, you're right. And we should talk about that. Unfortunately, a social worker I'm a social worker. We can pick up on anything. Unfortunately, a competent adult is allowed. They have the right to stay in an abusive relationship. So unless something happens in front of a mandated reporter, that you can call the police for assault. But unless something is visibly seen, he can stand there as aggressively as he wants. You can ask him to leave, but as you know, that's as far as that can go. And so she knows darn well what his looks mean and what his non-looks even mean, the micro expressions, the microaggressions. And you put all of that together, it leads to such a hostile environment for the woman. Yeah. Her existence alone, and then the baby's existence alone, okay, increases her lethality. We know that, okay? Just like when a woman attempts to leave, right? When a woman becomes pregnant, it increases her lethality. And that's the gravest consequence of all of interpersonal violence and domestic violence is the homicide and suicide factor. And this is heavy, but it's reality, and it's the intersectionality that we can't ignore anymore. We have to talk about it. We have to raise awareness. And I wrote it down because I think it's important. The recent study from the National Violent Death Reporting System, they found that pregnancy-related suicide, okay, which is one of the already number one causes of death for women after giving birth. So what they found is with the pregnancy associated suicides and homicide rates, 2 to 2.9 deaths per 100,000, they found that over 50%, it's 54%, over 50% of those suicides have violence within the relationship, and it is a factor of why it happened. This number to me is unacceptable.
So to be clear, it was about 2.5 out of 100,000. Mm-hmm. 100,000.
Yes.
That is unacceptable.
No.
It's shocking.
Yes. Yeah. Yes. Okay. It shows how much this is a reality of our society, that post delivery, mm-hmm. if there's violence involved, okay, that over half of the suicides that we find are related to that. Okay. And they have found that 45% of the homicides are related to that as well. That the men, 45% of maternal homicides are related to domestic violence.
So does that number, because that was the big question I had when we were prepping, does that have to do with just, the male on female homicide, or, all these, the true crime shows and all of that stuff, who is that woman? Andrea Yates, she drowned her children and stuff like that. Mm-hmm. Those get a lot of press coverage.
Yes.
Because they're very salacious.
Yes.
But I didn't know if that, if it was the woman could, perpetuate violence on others or homicide on others.
So
that was any in there.
So, that would be infanticide. Okay. And that is a separate category. And Andrea Yates had postpartum psychosis. Okay. And postpartum psychosis is more on the rare side. Okay. That it happens, and not all of it relates to homicide or suicide. That's a smaller number, but it is there. Okay. Now, the reason that's salacious is because a woman did it. We read every single day about men who kill their children every day because of domestic violence, and we don't string them up by their toes. Okay. But Andrea Yates and all of Susan Smith, all of them get pulled out in front of the torch wielders. But the reality is they all were suffering untreated, undiagnosed postpartum mood, anxiety disorders, or postpartum psychosis in these cases. Okay. And so while the majority of time has studied male on female, because it is the majority. That's reality.
Right.
99% is perpetuated by males, and 99% of the victims are females. However, time and stuff is catching up. It is culturally relevant to know that same-sex partners have interpersonal violence. There's a lot of things that happen. I cannot answer for certain if this specific study was heteronormative. That I don't know, but I can tell you the majority of the studies have all been mostly focused on that, but they can't stay that way.
Yeah, when I was researching for an article I wrote on stalking, that was one of the things that came up. Is there's a little bit on gay and lesbian relationships. There is close to nothing on trans or anything else.
Right.
Any sort of interpersonal violence, stalking, anything like that. There's just not a lot of numbers and not a lot of information. So, it's good as everything's opening up so we can see what's really going on.
Absolutely. Including this, right? This. I think a lot of people never thought of how much this actually is that close to each other. Okay. Working in the shelter, I didn't realize it until I saw it myself, that so many of the women were pregnant coming in and telling me that they would get kicked. And at first I was like, what do you mean? You know what I mean? Like, if anything, wouldn't that be the time that someone would back off? Right.
It's a logical thing to us.
Right.
But again, unless you're seeing it on TV in a Lifetime movie or something, you think, it's not real. It doesn't happen.
Right. It does. And all too often, as we see, Yeah.
It reminded me, and it might have been my intuition or something, but when things were getting testy at the end of my relationship, I remember having nightmares consecutively about me holding a baby and locking myself in a room, and like he would kick it down and it would be terrifying. It was almost like I don't know, intuition, premonition, dream, something like that.
Right.
And I'm like, I can't do that. I got to get out.
That might have been a dream, but that's a lot of women's realities.
Mm-hmm.
They're hiding, huddling. Okay. That's awful. It's just awful. The fear. Oh, I just couldn't even, and so it's so important that we talk about this. It's so important that we talk about how the construct doesn't seem to care that numerous men per day kill their wives, their girlfriends, their mothers, their sisters, their children, and we will turn the other way because we've read it a million times. And what's being done? And where's the report in the newspaper about she was pregnant?
Right.
And that some of the stories of the miscarriages, you don't read them,
in the big headlines, you mean?
Oh yeah. No.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
It was a turning point for me with this podcast when I was just felt this need to do something. And I would listen to the popular true crime stuff, but then I got to a point where I couldn't listen to it anymore because all we're hearing about is women who are in abusive relationships who got murdered.
Yeah.
And, they're 10-part episodes. Okay. Well, and yes, it does bring awareness to domestic violence in a way, but also can't we do something to prevent that from happening, to try to reach somebody before they get murdered or inform them before with a community of more information and spreading the word. And so that was a big catalyst for me starting this podcast.
Yeah.
Because I'm like, we got to reach people before they get murdered and they don't end up on My Favorite Murder. So we can do something about it,
Yeah. Yeah. And I think, I'm not sure what the answer is because, where we could probably start on any one of these spokes on this wheel. You know what I mean? If we could get women to the doctor,
Right.
But then again, the doctors,
they need to be more educated.
Yes, they don't know the violence to begin with, and they don't understand the dynamics, the power and control. And if a woman says something when it comes to pregnancy slightly off, they're going to back out and call DCF, which is the worst situation that could possibly happen here for the woman. Okay, to anger, right, her partner when DCF shows up knocking on the door. Okay, right.
Okay, so well, being a social worker, what would you suggest instead of calling DCF? Because, we could have doctors who might be listening to this to learn a little bit more.
Yeah.
What's the better course of action?
So it's hard because if she's saying that, she's being abused, okay, again, she can be, as horrible as that sounds. All right. However, if a doctor or a nurse hears that maybe he kicked her in the stomach, okay, directly, and she felt pain and she's talking about it, they might not have the same education and understanding, or their personal feelings might get in the way, and they might call DCF, and it becomes complicated there, okay, because DCF sometimes holds women responsible. It's a multi-systemic problem. We started from missing prenatal. Society doesn't even know. Doctors aren't educated. Social workers can be educated, and if they're mandated reporters, they can be contributing to the problem. It's a huge systemic problem. Okay, and if someone calls DCF often holds the woman responsible. If you don't get him out, we're taking your children away, including the one that's coming. Talk about traumatizing a woman.
Yeah.
Okay. Right. Okay. I'm never going to say another word to anybody. Yeah. Okay. And hold it all in, or many other things. Okay. But this is new in the sense of, we can hardly get doctors to ask women how they're feeling, okay, to try to assess their mental health. So it's something we're still trying to figure out, okay? Social workers, unfortunately and fortunately, do have mandated reporting, okay? And it's depending on, I guess, where a woman is in her leaving journey, that call might be the one that gets her out.
Yeah.
Okay, who knows? I don't know. We're trying to figure out with the numerous amount of players, how do we get a system in place with a broken system?
Yeah.
So we're all trying our best. The therapists and the counselors who work in the domestic violence shelters, the social workers in, the OBGYN, therapists on the outside who maybe are getting women with birth trauma who maybe decide they feel so safe, they tell you they're also in an abusive relationship and what's really going on. We're all trying in our own ways, including this podcast. One person could hear and go, I've been missing my appointments and I want my baby to be healthy and I'm going to go, so who knows? We're getting
baby
there.
Steps. It's getting there slowly. It might today be, I'm going to make the appointment and I'm going to go make sure my baby's healthy. Tomorrow it's, maybe I should contact a victims advocacy group and work on getting a plan in place, because that's something that they do to help you put a plan together.
Absolutely.
They give you little tips too about hiding things in your phone, making sure they can't track where you are. Yeah. So there are ways to outsmart the abuser and get the help that you need. So this was just, we're actually coming close to our time here, and it's such an important topic. I'd love for you to come back anytime and we can go more into depth on different topics or cover it, because it is huge and it's a huge problem and it's so complicated, but I just thought this was so necessary. So thank you for reaching out and talking to me today.
Absolutely. Thank you. And I would just like to add, at the end, that there are resources absolutely locally. Now that we're kind of in the virtual world, depending, there are ways to have things not tracked. that you can find support groups online. You can find, those kinds of ways of trying to find a way of finding support out there. And like you said, there's definitely local things, and I'm sure they can find plenty of resources on your site. And so I think no matter where, they've got to reach out. Like you said, baby steps is where we go from here.
Yeah. Oh, I'm so glad we got to talk about this today. Everybody, we do have resources tabs, but like I've said before, Google is your friend, and Google can also tell you how to hide your Google search. So, check that out, but get your local people on the ground, and, we'll try to do virtually whatever we can do to help anybody out there who's listening and in trouble.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Well, thank you for being here. And everybody, we will see you next week with some more great episodes. Thanks.
Thank you.
Well, that's our show. Thanks for listening. If you have any questions, or if you're willing to share your story, please email us at sageadvicepodcast@gmail.com. Until next week, remember, when you're kind to yourself, the healing can begin. See you next time.
This show was brought to you by inflowradio.com, the best curated talk radio network for personal development, wellness, spirituality, and conscious business.
If you or someone you love is in immediate danger, please call the National Domestic Violence Hotline at 1-800-799-SAFE. That's 1-800-799-7233. For more information, please see the resources tab at sage.community.